life, the universe and everything. Now I'll admit to having stolen that phrase from Douglas Adams, one of the titles of his books in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. And for those of you who are expecting the next slide to say 42, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. So, life, the universe and everything. Where does God fit in? Two of the most important questions we can ask are, is there a supreme being, a God, who made and rules over everything? And if there is, what does he have to do with us, and us with him now? Many people make it difficult for themselves even to start on a journey towards an answer to those questions, because they have an image of God as literally an old man in the sky, a kind of super Zeus. He supposedly occasionally interferes with things down here by performing a helpful miracle, but otherwise just watches disapprovingly. They probably even think this is what the church teaches. However, this misunderstanding fails to do justice to the church's genuine teaching. Indeed, this way of thinking reduces God to basically the same kind of thing as us, just a bigger or more powerful version. This is the viewpoint expressed in the inscription on one Scottish tombstone. Here lie I, Martin Elgin Brod, have mercy on my soul, Lord God, as I would do were I Lord God, and ye were Martin Elgin Brod. But of course, to treat ourselves and God as interchangeable is not just irreverent or disrespectful, but basically it's silly. As we'll see, God is completely different to anything or anyone else. Another problem people have is that they see science and God as competitors. God versus the logical Mr. Spock from Star Trek. This too is a misconception. Let's look at this one first. Many people believe science can explain everything. We don't need to think about God at all. They point to the progress of science and the fact that more and more things which seemed to be beyond natural explanation in the past are now understood as the result of natural causes, for example, lightning or life. On the other hand, there are those who claim that there must be gaps in nature which cannot be filled by science, but only by divine miracles. For example, they might point to the Big Bang at the very beginning of the universe and ask, but who caused that if there was nothing before it in time? Well, they look at the origin of life and they say, life could not possibly begin by natural means, therefore God must have done it. So we have two quite opposed viewpoints here. Who is right? One says God and science are competitors, and the more science grows, the less room there is for God. And the other one kind of agrees, but said, no, there must be room for God in these natural processes. He must have to intervene. So the idea of the second group is that natural processes need interventions in the chain of cause and effect. God has to intervene occasionally to make things work. And both these groups of people are wrong. Even if nature was without gaps in that sense, which it may well be, that doesn't mean nature is self-explanatory. In the end, science can do absolutely nothing to help us answer the two most important questions of all about the cosmos. Why does anything exist rather than nothing? And why this particular something, this universe? The reason for this is that science is about explaining change, the processes of change. It shows how we get from one state in nature to another, using the concept of scientific laws, which describe the patterns or regularities that natural processes follow. In other words, science needs two things to start with in order to explain or predict anything. First, it assumes that there must be a set of natural laws. Second, it assumes that those laws actually describe something, that there's this material reality which they are then able to explain the processes of change regarding. Now, we need to distinguish between these two things. Yes, you have a set of natural laws, but then there has to be something for the laws to describe, otherwise they just remain a set of equations. And a mere set of equations don't have the power to do anything or to make reality. The laws, say the fundamental laws, the laws of physics, as equations, can't cause matter to exist, because as mere equations, they're simply mathematical abstractions, effectively they're thoughts. As a science teacher, I've written many mathematical equations in my time, but universes don't pop into existence every time I write one or think of one. The equations themselves don't have that power. But you could think of the laws instead as properties of matter. But then they also still can't explain where matter came from. If the laws are properties of matter instead of mere equations, then as properties of matter, they rely on the existence already of that matter. So, contrary to what some may claim, if we truly think about this clearly, the mathematical laws that underlie the physics, the chemistry, the biology of nature cannot bring the material substrate of nature into existence. Now, obviously, this means science can never explain why there is a universe described by these laws. Indeed, the ultimate goal of physics is to work out the one great equation that governs the whole material universe and includes within it all the other equations. They already have a name for this equation, the TOE, the TOE, the theory of everything. Therefore, when science has gone as far as it can go, the biggest questions remain untouched. Let's have a look at this fundamental question of existence. Now, either something exists because it has to by its own very nature, or it doesn't have to exist, but it does exist because of something else, something that caused it, for example. Now, philosophers would say the first kind of being, the one that just exists by its own nature, is necessary. The second would be called contingent. Contingent nature. Well, none of the things that make up the universe have to exist. They are contingent, not necessary. There's no reason that the piece of paper in front of me must exist, as we would soon see if we put a lit match to it. However, somebody could claim that while none of the individual bits and pieces that make up the universe are necessary, and so need something else to cause them, they cause each other, and so the universe as a whole would then be necessary. This could be represented by this diagram. Notice in this diagram, where each arrow is to do with cause and effect, one thing leading to another, there are no loose ends, nothing without a cause. Everything leads on to something else, and it forms a closed loop. Well, when I say that they don't need a cause, except for one thing, the network itself. So each state at the end of each arrow, you could have a thing or an entity or an event in nature. Each of them has a cause, and we form that loop of cause and effect, but the one thing that isn't explained by all of this is why the network's there at all. The network itself is not explained. The universe as a whole does not explain itself, so to speak. Why is it there at all? Drawing a clever little web like this does not get us any closer to answering this basic question. To say a set of contingent beings can explain or cause each other, which is what this diagram does, is rather like this. This is a good analogy. Imagine you came across a circle of people holding hands, but all apparently hovering with their feet a metre above the ground, so they're all levitating. You ask them how they're managing this. Where are the strings? Where are the ropes? What would be your reaction if they answered, No, we don't need any ropes or strings. Each of us is able to be up here because the person on our left is pulling each of us up. And since we're in a circle, that means we can all be pulled up. Well, I hope you wouldn't accept that explanation. But if you would, you can try it if you like and see if that circle of people levitating and pulling each other up works. It doesn't. Therefore, we need to go outside the contingent universe to explain its existence. But if we just go to another contingent being, such as a previous universe or a multiverse that turns into many universes, we make no progress. We just extend the extent of contingency, of unexplained nature. What we need to do is to get back to a being which is truly necessary to account for all these contingent beings, all these things which cannot explain themselves, which need a cause, and which depend on something else to exist. But how could a being be necessary? It's relatively easy to see that an apple, a brick, the moon, or even this specific universe as a whole have nothing about them that makes their non-existence inconceivable or impossible. It's harder to work out what could make a being necessary. So we might start by looking beyond particular things like bricks and apples to what philosophers call universals, concepts like truth, love, or even the idea of a sphere. But these are all just that, concepts or ideas. While they seem independent of the particular characteristics of particular material universes, how they would actually exist outside a mind or cause anything on their own is the key question. Again, we're just talking about abstractions here, ideas. And yes, it's true, the idea of a sphere is the idea of a sphere no matter how the particular nature of the universe is. The fact that 2 + 2 = 4 is going to be true, and it doesn't depend on the specific characteristics of the physical universe. These mathematical and other truths do seem to be independent of the particular mathematics that describes our universe. The concept of what truth is or what goodness is, again, don't seem to depend on things like the mass of a particle or the recessional speed of galaxies, to use a couple of examples from physics. So those concepts, those ideas, those universals, while they seem to be necessary in some sense, independent of the particularities of material reality, we have to leave them aside for the moment because they're not the solution to our problem. They can't cause anything, even if they are in some sense necessary. Call them eternal truths, if you like, but they're not concrete things or entities. We'll come back to them later. All right, so if they don't solve the problem, where can we go? Well, the clue to the solution to our problem is a property that all contingent beings have in common. Their existence, the fact that they are, is separate from their essence, what they are. The difference between an imaginary or conceptual apple and a real apple is in the existence, not the essence. We can conceive of an apple just like one we have on our tabletop at home, but in a different position. We could say the exact same apple, imagine it being over here, or conceive of it being over here. So what's the difference between the imaginary apple and the real apple? Well, it's not the essence, it's the same nature of apple, but it's the existence, whether it actually exists in reality. All right, so essence and existence are different things. There is no quality or property an apple in itself has that makes it impossible for it to cease to exist or accounts for its existence in the first place. That's what makes the apple a contingent being. So apples can either exist or not exist. They're not necessary because their existence and their essence are distinct, separate. What they are does not account for the fact that they are. That means we require for a necessary being something where the essence and the existence are inseparable, identical. We require a being whose very essence is to exist. Now, a philosopher's name for such a being might be existence itself, or ultimate reality, or absolute being. Something that is existence itself, or ultimate reality, or absolute being. Because it's ultimate reality, it has to be real. Because it's absolute being, it must be. It's existence itself, so it must, by its very nature, exist. Now, when I said we require such a thing, such a concept at least, remember we're forced to find a necessary being to explain all the undeniably real, contingent or unnecessary ones. All right, we might say at this point, Eureka, we found it, an explanation for the existence of the universe. Existence itself. Only trouble is, that answer raises as many questions as it answers. What else can we know about this mysterious existence itself, absolute being, ultimate reality? Does it not have any other characteristics apart from being? And how does this explain why we have this particular universe and not some other type? The very things we referred to before that science could not, in an ultimate sense, explain. Fortunately, it turns out that a lot can be derived from this rather bare definition, existence itself, and the fact that the necessary being caused all other beings. Since this being, absolute being, is not limited by particular characteristics, it's not this or that thing, it's unlimited. It doesn't have to be this or be that, it just bees, so to speak, it just exists. It doesn't have those limitations, those particularities. So anything which hints at the inferiority of limits or of particularity cannot apply to absolute being, to existence itself. Also, we know that this being had to have caused everything else, so all the positive qualities exhibited in creation should be represented in superior form in this creative absolute being, the being which causes all other beings. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that this absolute being can't be any kind of object with a specific or particular shape or size or temperature or composition. Nor can it be in any way, if you like, dead or ignorant or unable to choose, powerless or evil. These are all limitations. This thing is without limits. This means we're dealing with a non-material, or what theologians would call spiritual, living being who is perfectly good, all-knowing, all-powerful, and able to do whatever it wants, because if it was not those things, it would have limitations, particularities. It would not be absolute or being or ultimate reality. So, existence itself could freely choose to create or not to create contingent entities, and what kind of creation to bring into existence. So the answer to the question, why do we have this universe and not some other universe, could best be expressed by the statement, it just took the Creator's fancy to do it that way. He doesn't need an outside reason. And I'm referring to existence itself as the Creator because we've already established that existence itself, absolute being, ultimate reality, is the necessary being on which contingent beings would have to rely for their existence. The ultimate cause, if you will. Now, is there another name for this absolute being? Well, yes. The way we've come to describe this being, by taking away limits, we realise that it has the same characteristics as God, as traditionally described. It should be noted that God is not just another good thing, he is goodness itself. Otherwise he would be limited to a particular manifestation of goodness. He would be good in this way and therefore not in that way. Indeed, other theological descriptions for God are the absolute good, the absolute truth. And this is where the eternal truths we spoke of before find their true home, in God as the ultimate reality that grounds all other realities, all truths and all facts. In summary, God is goodness itself, existence itself, and the cause of every limited, finite thing, everything that is contingent, everything where the existence and the essence are distinct. But somebody might ask at this point, what does any of this have to do with Christianity? Well, in the Old Testament we have the God who reveals himself there, revealing his name as I am. That's what Yahweh means. So the Old Testament name of God means I am, or he who is. Not I am this, or I am that, but just I am, or he is. He simply is. This is all the more compelling because the culture that recorded this was at that time one of the least philosophical in history, ancient Israel. If you read the Old Testament, you realise it's a very different kind of document to the documents the ancient Greek philosophers produced, for example. A different mindset, a different way of describing things, mainly through narrative rather than abstract ideas. And yet, part of the revelation to this seemingly unphilosophical people, part of this primal revelation to them is God as he who is, or the I am. Existence itself, absolute being, ultimate reality. Now similarly in the New Testament we're told God is love, not just God loves or God is loving, but twice it says simply God is love, which, since love is also said to be the fulfilling of the law in the New Testament, and we can see that love leads to so much else of the content of morality, this is basically saying God is goodness itself. And of course he's called the Creator frequently in both the Old and the New Testament. So yes, the philosophical answer we've come up with to try to explain why this universe and why does the universe exist at all, the answer to that question philosophically has a strong harmony with the answer that we get from the scriptures. And at this point, I'll leave you with that thought and finish this particular presentation.